Responsible governments should not only support Israel in rolling back Iran's aggression, they should join Israel. They should join Israel in stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program. In this body, in the Security Council, we're going to have a deliberation in a few months. And I call on the Security Council to snap back UN Security Council sanctions against Iran, because we must all do everything in our power to ensure that Iran never gets nuclear weapons. For decades, I've been warning the world against Iran's nuclear program. Our actions delayed this program by perhaps a decade, but we haven't stopped it. We've delayed it, but we haven't stopped it. Iran now seeks to weaponize its nuclear program for the sake of the peace and security of all your countries. For the sake of the peace and security of the entire world, we must not let that happen. And I assure you, Israel will do everything in its power to make sure it doesn't happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question before us is simple. Which of these two maps that I showed you will shape our future? Will it be the blessings of peace and prosperity for Israel, our Arab partners, and the rest of the world? Or will it be the curse in which Iran and its proxies spread carnage and chaos everywhere? Israel has already made its choice. We've decided to advance the blessing. We're building a partnership for peace with our Arab neighbors while fighting the forces of terror that threaten that peace. For nearly a year, the brave men and women of the IDF have been systematically crushing Hamas's terror army that once ruled Gaza. On October 7th, the day of that invasion into Israel, that terror army numbered nearly 40,000 terrorists. It was armed with more than 15,000 rockets. It had 350 miles of terror tunnels, an underground network bigger than the New York subway system, which they used to wreak havoc above and below ground. A year later, the IDF has killed or captured more than half of these terrorists, destroyed over 90% of their rocket arsenal, and eliminated the key segments of their terror tunnel network. In major military operations, we destroyed nearly all of Hamas's terror battalions, 23 out of 24 battalions. Now, to complete our victory, we are focused on mopping up Hamas's remaining fighting capabilities. We are taking out senior terrorist commanders and destroying remaining terrorist infrastructure. But all the while, and I'll say this one more time, we remain focused on our sacred mission, bringing our hostages home, and we will not stop until that mission is complete. Now, ladies and gentlemen, even with Hamas's greatly diminished military capability, the terrorists still exercise some governing power in Gaza by stealing the food that we enable aid agencies to bring into Gaza. Hamas steals the food, and then they hike the prices. They feed their bellies, and then they fill their coffers with money that they extort from their own people. They sell the stolen food at exorbitant prices. And that's how they stay in power. Well, this too has to end, and we're working to bring it to an end. And the reason is simple. Because if Hamas stays in power, it will regroup, rearm, and attack Israel again and again and again, as it is vowed to do. So Hamas has got to go. Just imagine, for those who say, well, Hamas has to stay, it has to be part of a post-war Gaza, imagine in a post-war situation in World War II. Imagine allowing the defeated Nazis in 1945 to rebuild Germany. It's inconceivable. It's ridiculous. It didn't happen then. It's not going to happen now. This is why Israel will reject any role for Hamas in a post-war Gaza. We don't seek to resettle Gaza. What we seek is a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza. Only then can we ensure that this round of fighting will be the last round of fighting. We are ready to work with regional and other partners to support a local civilian administration in Gaza committed to peaceful coexistence. As for the hostages, I have a message for the Hamas captors. Let them go. Let them go. All of them. Those alive today must be returned alive, and the remains of those whom you brutally killed must be returned to their families. Those families here with us today, and others in Israel, deserve to have a resting place for their loved ones, a place where they can grieve and remember them. This war, ladies and gentlemen, this war can come to an end now. All that has to happen is for Hamas to surrender, lay down its arms, and release all the hostages. But if they don't, we will fight until we achieve victory, total victory. There is no substitute for it. Israel must also defeat Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah is the quintessential terror organization in the world today. It has tentacles that span in all continents. It has murdered more Americans and more Frenchmen than any group except bin Laden. It's murdered the citizens of many countries represented in this room. And it has attacked Israel viciously over the last 20 years. In the last year, completely unprovoked. A day after the Hamas massacre, on October 7th, Hezbollah began attacks against Israel, which forced more than 60,000 Israelis on our northern border to leave their homes, becoming refugees in their own land. Hezbollah turned vibrant towns in the north of Israel into ghost towns. So I want you to think about this in equivalent American terms. Just imagine if terrorists turned El Paso and San Diego into ghost towns. Then ask yourself, how long would the American government tolerate that? A day? A week? A month? I doubt they tolerate it even for a single day. Yet Israel has been tolerating this intolerable situation for nearly a year. Well, I've come here today to say, enough is enough. We won't rest until our citizens can return safely to their homes. We will not accept a terror army perched on our northern border, able to perpetrate another October 7th-style massacre. For 18 years, Hezbollah brazenly refused to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which requires it to move its forces away from our borders. Instead, Hezbollah moved right up to our border. They secretly dug terror tunnels to infiltrate our communities and indiscriminately fired thousands of rockets into our towns and villages. They fire these rockets and missiles not from military sites, not from that. They do that too. But they fire those rockets and missiles after they place them in schools, in hospitals, in apartment buildings, and in the private homes of the citizens of Lebanon. They endanger their own people. They put a missile in every kitchen, a rocket in every garage. I said to the people of Lebanon this week, get out of the death trap that Hezbollah has put you in. Don't let Nasrallah drag Lebanon into the abyss. We're not at war with you. We're at war with Hezbollah, which has hijacked your country and threatens to destroy ours. As long as Hezbollah chooses the path of war, Israel has no choice, and Israel has every right to remove this threat and return our citizens to their homes safely. And that's exactly what we're doing. Just this week, the IDF destroyed large percentages of Hezbollah's rockets, which it built with Iran's funding for 3 decades. We took out senior military commanders who not only shed Israeli blood, but American and French blood as well. And then we took out their replacements, and then the replacements of their replacements. And we'll continue degrading Hezbollah until all our objectives are met. Ladies and gentlemen, we're committed to removing the curse of terrorism that threatens all civilized societies. But to truly realize the blessing of a new Middle East, we must continue the path we paved with the Abraham Accords 4 years ago. Above all, this means achieving a historic peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And having seen the blessings that we've already brought with the Abraham Accords, the millions of Israelis who've already flown back and forth across the Arabian Peninsula, over the skies of Saudi Arabia, to the Gulf countries, the trade, the tourism, the joint ventures, the peace, I say to you, what blessings such a peace with Saudi Arabia would bring. It would be a boon to the security and economy of our 2 countries. It would boost trade and tourism across the region. It would help transform the Middle East into a global juggernaut. Our 2 countries could cooperate on energy, water, agriculture, artificial intelligence, and many, many other fields. Such a peace, I'm sure, would be a true pivot of history. It would usher in a historic reconciliation between the Arab world and Israel, between Islam and Judaism, between Mecca and Jerusalem. While Israel is committed to achieving such a peace, Iran and its terror proxies are committed to scuttling it. That's why one of the best ways to foil Iran's nefarious designs is to achieve the peace. Such a peace would be the foundation for an even broader Abrahamic alliance. And that alliance would include the United States, Israel's current Arab peace partners, Saudi Arabia, and others who choose the blessing of peace. It would advance security and prosperity across the Middle East and bring enormous benefits to the rest of the world. With American support and leadership, I believe this vision can materialize, and much sooner than people think. And as the Prime Minister of Israel, I will do everything in my power to make it happen. This is an opportunity that we and the world should not let go by. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel has made its choice. We seek to move forward to a bright age of prosperity and peace. Iran and its proxies have also made their choice. They want to move back to a dark age of terror and war. And now I have a question. And I pose that question to you. What choice will you make? Will your nation stand with Israel? Will you stand with democracy and peace? Or will you stand with Iran, a brutal dictatorship that subjugates its own people, exports terrorism across the globe? In this battle between good and evil, there must be no equivocation. When you stand with Israel, you stand for your own values and your own interests. Yes, we're defending ourselves, but we're also defending you against a common enemy that through violence and terror seeks to destroy our way of life. So there should be no confusion about this. But unfortunately, there is a lot of it in many countries. And in this very hall, as I've just heard. Good is portrayed as evil, and evil is portrayed as good. We see this moral confusion when Israel is falsely accused of genocide, when we defend ourselves against enemies who try to commit genocide against us. We see this too when Israel is absurdly accused by the ICC prosecutor of deliberately starving Palestinians in Gaza. What an absurdity. We helped bring in 700,000 tons of food into Gaza. That's more than 3,000 calories a day for every man, woman, and child in Gaza. We see this moral confusion when Israel is falsely accused of deliberately targeting civilians. We don't want to see a single person, a single innocent person die. That's always a tragedy. And that's why we do so much to minimize civilian casualties, even as our enemies use civilians as human shields. And no army has done what Israel is doing to minimize civilian casualties. We drop flyers, we send text messages, we make phone calls by the millions to ensure that Palestinian civilians get out of harm's way. We spare no effort in this noble pursuit. We see yet another profound moral confusion when self-described progressives march against the democracy of Israel. Don't they realize they support the Iranian-backed goons in Tehran and in Gaza? The goons who gun down protesters, murder women for not covering their hair, and hang gays in public squares, some progressives. According to the US Director of National Intelligence, Iran funds and fuels many of the protesters against Israel. Who knows, maybe some of the protesters, or even many of the protesters outside this building now. Ladies and gentlemen, King Solomon, who reigned in our eternal capital, Jerusalem, 3,000 years ago, proclaimed something that is familiar to all of you. He said, "There is nothing new under the sun." Well, in an age of space travel, quantum physics, and artificial intelligence, some would argue that's a debatable statement. But one thing is undeniable. There is definitely nothing new at the United Nations. Take it from me. I first spoke from this podium as Israel's ambassador to the UN in 1984. That's exactly 40 years ago. And in my maiden speech here, I think it's the same podium, by the way. In my maiden speech here, I spoke against a proposal to expel Israel from this body. 4 decades later, I find myself defending Israel against that same preposterous proposal. And who's leading the charge this time? Not Hamas, but Abbas, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. This is the man who claims he wants peace with Israel. Yet he still refuses to condemn the horrific massacre of October 7th. He's still paying hundreds of millions to terrorists who murder Israelis and Americans. It's called pay for slay. The more you murder, the more you get paid. And he still wages unremitting diplomatic warfare against Israel's right to exist and against Israel's right to defend itself. And by the way, they amount to the same thing. Because if you can't defend yourself, you can't exist. Not in our neighborhood, certainly, and maybe not in yours. Standing in this podium 40 years ago, I told the sponsors of that outrageous resolution to expel Israel, "Gentlemen, check your fanaticism at the door." Today, I tell President Abbas and all of you who would shamefully support that resolution, check your fanaticism at the door. The singling out of the one and only Jewish state continues to be a moral stain on the United Nations. It has made this once respected institution contemptible in the eyes of decent people everywhere. But for the Palestinians, this UN House of Darkness is home court. They know that in this swamp of anti-Semitic bile, there's an automatic majority willing to demonize the Jewish state on anything. In this anti-Israel flat earth society, Any false charge, any outlandish allegation can muster a majority. In the last decade, there have been more resolutions passed against Israel in this hall at the UN General Assembly than against the entire world combined. Actually, more than twice as many. Since 2014, this body condemned Israel 174 times. It condemned all the other countries in the world 73 times. That's more than 100 extra condemnations for the Jewish state. What hypocrisy, what a double standard, what a joke. So the UN's hostility So all the speeches you heard today, all the hostility directed at Israel this year, it's not about Gaza. It's about Israel. It's always been about Israel's very existence. And I say to you, until Israel, until the Jewish state is treated like other nations, until this anti-Semitic swamp is drained, the UN will be viewed by fair-minded people everywhere as nothing more than a contemptuous farce. Now, given the anti-Semitism at the UN, it should surprise no one that the prosecutor at the ICC, one of the UN's affiliated organs, is considering issuing arrest warrants against me and Israel's defense minister, the democratically elected leaders of the democratic state of Israel. The ICC prosecutors rushed to judgment. His refusal to treat Israel with its independent courts, the way other democracies are treated, is hard to explain by anything other than pure anti-Semitism. Ladies and gentlemen, the real war criminals are not in Israel. They're in Iran. They're in Gaza, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen. Those of you who stand with these war criminals, those of you who stand with evil against good, with a curse against the blessing, those of you who do so should be ashamed of yourselves. But I have a message for you. Israel will win this battle. We'll win this battle because we don't have a choice. After generations in which our people were slaughtered, remorselessly butchered, and no one raised a finger in our defense, we now have a state. We now have a brave army, an army of incomparable courage, and we are defending ourselves. As the book of Samuel says in the Bible, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. The eternity of Israel will not falter. In the Jewish people's epic journey from antiquity, in our odyssey through the tempests and upheavals of modern times, that ancient promise has always been kept, and it will hold true for all time. To borrow a great poet's phrase, Israel will not go gently into that good night. We will never need to rage against the dying of the light, because the torch of Israel will forever shine bright. To the people of Israel and to the soldiers of Israel, I say, be strong and of good courage. חזקו ואמצו ואל תיראו מפניהם, כי אדוני אלוהיך הוא ההולך עמך, לא ירפך ולא יעזבך. Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live, now, tomorrow, forever. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Mia Amor Motley, Prime Minister, Minister for National Security and the Public Service, and Minister for Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment of Barbados. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency and invite her to address the Assembly.
President, we need a reset, and we need to reset. Mr. President, in your absence, I congratulate you on your assumption of this chairmanship of the General Assembly. We can wait. As I said, Mr. President, we need a reset, and we need to reset. Those of us here today representing our brothers and our sisters the world over have endured 4 years of polycrises. As the children of Mother Earth, we continue to wrestle with the climate crisis. As a human family, we grapple with the legacy of the pandemic. As a digitally connected people, we are now, regrettably, confronted by multiple theaters of war and scenes of horror and famine flowing from that war, armed conflict instead of pursued development. Citizens of every country as well, struggling to contain the rising cost of living and the implications for them and their families on a day-to-day basis. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, we are all now threatened by the second but silent pandemic of antimicrobial resistance, together with a growing incidence of death and disability from chronic non-communicable diseases. We cannot afford the distraction of war. If ever there was a time to pause and to reset, it is now. Collectively as an international community, and individually as leaders in each of our countries, we must now deliver new opportunities and solutions to these crises which dampen economic growth, which restrict the ambitions of our people and numb our sense of the beauty and goodness that the world ought to be offering because it has it to offer. The reset for which I am calling, and indeed all of our citizens are demanding, must see an end to all forms of discrimination. That rules and institutions today exist which create first and second class citizens, as we have said from this podium year after year, depending on your nation of origin, militate against the trust and the credibility and the hope, and it fosters a crisis of confidence in the existing international order, which must become inclusive and responsive for all. More than any other complaint from this podium has been the disparity in treatment and the inability to be able to have fair and transparent treatment for all that would lead to the trust necessary for us to solve the problems of our times that are truly beyond man-made causes. Neo-colonialist structures that perpetuate and reflect an old world order characterized by racism and classism and misogyny, while ignoring the legitimate aspirations of billions, will not help to foster the hope or trust that is necessary to meet these polycrises. We must ensure that the global institutions give developing countries, especially small vulnerable states like my own, or vulnerable middle-income countries, seats at the table of decision-making where we can be seen, heard, become active agents in our own cause, and lead our own development paradigms. My friends, we are reminded that 2024 is the final year of the United Nations Decade for the People of African Descent. Much has been achieved, but the recognition, the justice, and the development for people of African descent that was promised by this decade has, to say the least, not yet been fully realized. And it is for this reason that the Caribbean community joins the growing chorus, and my own country in particular, for the immediate proclamation of a second decade to complete the unfinished work and address the matter of reparations for slavery and colonialism. I start here because this is a necessary but complex conversation. And the Caribbean community is resolute that it must happen. Its resolution lies, and I want to be very clear, its resolution lies in a multi-generational approach, in the same way that the £20 million sterling debt that was incurred by the British government only was repaid in this 21st century, almost 200 years later, so that the notion of unaffordability becomes a non-issue once we recognize that the solution to reparations must be multi-generational and grounded in development. Mr. President, of necessity, the reset must also be characterized by institutional reform, which has to start in the United Nations councils. These councils suggest that some are full members, and others are only part members, and some may be part-time members, and some may be occasional members. All of this has no place in the 21st century. And the anger and the mistrust of our citizens in institutions, in leaders, in multilateralism, and in the processes which exclude while yielding much talk and little action is very real. And nowhere is reform and consequentially trust and hope more important to the well-being of billions of people today than in relation to the global financial architecture. Restricted access to capital, its disproportionately high costs barring us from doing that which we must, its inadequate scale, and the overwhelming burden of debt often imposed on us by circumstances beyond our control. These are all now combining to force governments in the world's poorest countries, and frankly, across many vulnerable middle-income countries, to devote more resources to debt service than to health and education, and in some instances, even infrastructure. For far too many members of the human family, cold ground is our bed, and rock is our pillow. Too many go to bed with their bellies hungry, and too many may not even have a bed. Our reset must therefore collectively build a common agenda that reflects and reinforces our shared humanity. It is that shared humanity that binds us together. Mr. President, you know better than most. Our African brothers and sisters got it right with the principle of Ubuntu, and have used this principle, this General Assembly, to remind us that its simplicity is what we should aspire to. I am because you are. I am because we are. My well-being is tied to yours, and our collective well-being is connected to Mother Earth. This best voices the approach needed to give expression to the reset that is absolutely necessary. And we acknowledge that there are glimpses of hope. We have, for example, on Monday, agreed to a pact for the future, but we still have war. We have agreed on a global digital compact, but we still have raging pandemics in the slow motion silent pandemic. All of this rests, my friends, on the common agenda that the Secretary General had set out for us before. Yesterday, we agreed in a high-level meeting on a political declaration on antimicrobial resistance. A lot of fancy words, but this is where the rubber hits the road. Because all of us in this room know people who have died from infections and for whom the antibiotics simply are no longer effective, so that within 48 hours, a person's life is snuffed out, almost as if they were at war. My friends, following on the intervention of the Bridgetown Initiative and the Paris Pact for People and Planet, the efforts of many across the board, we acknowledge that there is some hope. And it is evident in the beginnings of the reform that we are seeing little by little, but nevertheless, they have started. These are all important steps, but we cannot take our eyes off the prize. Barbados' call for a fundamental reset includes attitudes and behavior as much as actions or reforms. Heads of government are in agree that we must trigger national development agendas of transformation with both speed and scale. We have a date with destiny against 1.5 degrees. We know that that is what is needed to survive. And the implications for people, even as we speak, can be dire. But if there is a failure to act with clarity of purpose, and if the political will retards progress on the front of the much-needed reform within the international financial institutions, purely because heads of government do not speak to ministers of finance when they reach Washington, D.C., or their board directors, if there is a need for that to be dealt with, then, my friends, there must be a commitment to be equal to the current challenges of member states if we are not to perpetuate the discriminatory practices that result in undermining the transformational opportunities that we need. Depriving vulnerable countries from being able to access concessional income that is long enough to build the resilience to save lives and to protect livelihoods is unjust. And that is why we must remain focused. That is why, my friends, we launched yesterday the third iteration of the Bridgetown Initiative, which identifies three key principles, very simply. One, we must change the rules of the international financial system and reform its governance and instruments. Two, we must shock-proof vulnerable economies by dealing with debt and liquidity in a comprehensive, development-focused manner. And if we need to give countries a shot of liquidity like we give them a shot of adrenaline to avoid them falling off the cliff of death, then we must do so. And thirdly, we must augment financing by boosting country capacity to invest in resilience by several means, including what has been announced already, the rechanneling of special drawing rights through our multilateral development partners, but that will only be truly effective if there is another issuance of SDRs in the near future. Indeed, we must also address the challenge, and this I believe to be the fundamental mission of this generation, of how we are going to secure the global public commons to be able to maintain our safety and stability as a global community. We're going to have to discuss how we can secure it, and of course, how we must finance it. And that is not only the climate crisis or the loss of biodiversity that we speak about, but the other many global challenges that can truly destabilize countries and regions. Mr. President, these considerations are of fundamental importance to the sustainable existence of our generations, future generations. The SIDS agenda is another story of promises made but not kept. 30 years ago, the international community gathered in my own country to take action for the first time on the unique challenges faced by small island developing states. We birthed in my home country the first ever global agenda for small island developing states, which became known as the Barbados Program of Action. I thank Mauritius for its strategy of implementation, Samoa for its pathway. They were carriers of the baton of a development agenda for small island developing states in the intervening years, in the face of multiple global crises from health to climate to finance. The vulnerabilities, yes, of our countries as small states have become more pronounced. In May of this year, we gathered in Antigua and Barbuda for the 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States. And I call on the international community and the multilateral system to let us work together to ensure that the promise created in Bridgetown in 1994 is delivered and realized through the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS 2024, otherwise known as ABBAS. Let me use this opportunity as well to inform you that 2 days ago we took over the presidency of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, the V20 countries of the world, from Ghana, whose president I would like to thank for the excellent stewardship of the group over the past 2 years, and indeed for the strengthening of its institutional capacity. The priorities of our term as chair of the V20 countries will be the multiple dimensions of climate crisis, dealing with them, the impact of the climate crisis on human health, and of course, the issue of debt and climate, because if we don't solve that, we cannot take the appropriate actions to deal with climate. I invite all United Nations members who are not yet members of the V20 but who are climate vulnerable to join this group, because it is only through amplification of our voices and consistency of our message and solidarity that we will continue to see the pace and scale of reforms that we need to be able to save our people's lives. I commend to you the declaration of the leaders of the Climate Vulnerable Forum that was adopted this week on Wednesday. Mr. President, above all else, we need a global reset on peace. There needs to be global peace. And those of us who are old enough would have recognized that there are peaks and valleys as it relates to this issue of conflict. There are few areas where the world is more in need of the United Nations acting as the United Nations to secure the objectives of the Charter than in the area of peace and security. The silence that has engulfed Sudan is unacceptable and may well be rooted in the racism that the world still carries as a badge of honor from the victories of the last great war of the World War II. The actions in Myanmar cannot continue. Ukraine has sucked more oxygen out of the global community and the global financial system than any of us can appropriately accept at that very time when the world needs to be applying its resources and efforts to fighting the greatest crisis known to mankind. And the spread of the war from Gaza to the consequences in the West Bank to now clearly what is happening in Lebanon as we speak with Israel, all of these are but the tip of an iceberg of death, violence, and instability, and robs the global community of oxygen and resources at the very time when we need it most in a strategic way. We all know, as students of history, that even the longest war in history came to an end. These wars, yes, they too will come to an end. But the question is when and at what cost, and without much loss of life, with how many children not being able to be either given the chance to live or will now live with memories of war that will affect their every action for the next 60, 70, 80 years of their lives. Innocent people are paying the price with the one thing that is theirs to give, and they don't give it willingly. It is their life. Unless we address the root causes of these wars, one by one, and the manners in which they are being sustained and financed, we will never, never know anything else other than war and rumors of war in these theaters. The transmittal of these scenes of horror in real time into people's bedrooms, into people's living rooms, will trigger two extreme reactions, neither of which are acceptable to us in the third decade of the 21st century. We will either get the desensitizing of ordinary people to the loss of lives especially those of innocent children and women on the one hand, or we will get on the other hand the anger and inclination for vengeance that it spawns necessarily. We need peace. And it cannot be too difficult for us to work for peace. It is the same Bible that tells us in the stories of the Old Testament, much which has guided many people across this world. But when we turn from the Old Testament to the New Testament, it is Romans that says to us, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, not any country, not any human being. So that the Bible can't be used as a convenient aid when it suits us and rejected when it doesn't. In the midst of this maelstrom, we were very clear. My country took the step this year of recognizing and establishing diplomatic relations with the state of Palestine, in spite of having supported a two-state solution since 1969. And we did this because it is clear to us that the state and people of Palestine, human beings, are entitled to full recognition by integration into and support from the international community. The Charter does not say we the people, with the exception of any one group from any one part of the world. We join with others, therefore, in congratulating the state of Palestine in taking their seat among the United Nations member states as they did on the 10th of September of this year. And let me be clear, we condemn the actions of Hamas on October 7th. But we equally and strongly deplore the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, which is the result of the disproportionate use of force by Israel. There's no justification for it. And that is why treaties exist governing the rules of engagement for war. Because we as human beings learned better and know better and committed to better. A two-state solution, no matter how elusive it may appear to be now, is the only answer. And I've said already this week that we have known difficult battles in mankind's history. But when we were in it, we didn't think we could achieve it, but we did. We abolished slavery. We removed apartheid in South Africa. These battles are not beyond our creativity, our capacity, and our resilience to resolve them. Similarly, we insist that the killing in Ukraine really has to stop. The people of Ukraine must be allowed to live within the internationally recognized boundaries of their state in peace and freedom from the threat of use or force. And as I said, it is sucking too much oxygen out of the global financial system, and countries that should be the beneficiary of aid are being told that they may have to wait in the interest of the defense of others because of war. I say to us truly, there has to be a singular commitment to build a peace. Truly. Mr. President, my own region has not escaped the scourge of instability and violence. The Americas do not constitute today a theater of war. But we are today witnessing, for some years now, an unprecedented escalation in the number and caliber of assault weapons which are finding themselves in the hands of criminals who are wreaking havoc on the legal systems and our societies, particularly in the small island developing states of the Caribbean and indeed in the wider states of Central and Latin America. This scourge caused by guns manufactured in the United States of America primarily also requires a fundamental reset. The right of persons to bear arms in countries not engaged in military conflict should not be an opening to accept as legitimate the presence of assault weapons in countries. It is simply not right. There is no place for assault weapons in our societies. I turn now to the fate of the people of Haiti, which continues to be of major concern to our people in the Caribbean region. The global community now has an opportunity for an essential reset with how it addresses its relationship with Haiti, and which has been born in all kinds of semi and partial concern over the course of the last few decades. We continue to have it as a recurrent decimal because we have failed to solve the problems and put them on a sustainable path to development for its people. What is needed is transformation of our sister nation. And yes, we must provide first and foremost security, but transformation must be its handmaiden. The government and people of Haiti need the full support of the international community, not just in the short term, but in the long term. And yes, this starts by extending the mandate of the Multinational Security Support Force, escalating the work of the United Nations, deploying all the tools of bilateral, regional, and global cooperation, not excluding countries who want to participate for spurious reasons, ensuring that those of us who can step up to the plate by significantly increasing the pledge funds, that we do so, because we know that it takes cash to be able to deploy the forces and the police necessary to help with the restoration, so that Haitian mother or that Haitian child can go about their day-to-day life without fear of being assaulted or killed or being denied the right to work because of their simple fear of walking the streets. The Caribbean community has been working hard this year to support our largest member state. And in the early part of the first few months of this year, we met on Haiti almost 3 to 4 times a week to guarantee the stability that we ask you now to help us secure. We thank the efforts of the Eminent Persons Group of former CARICOM prime ministers who were on the front line of helping to resolve this complex problem day in and day out, so that we could find a political consensus for Haiti. That Haiti had at this General Assembly both the interim president of the Transitional Council and Prime Minister Cornille is a remarkable achievement given where Haiti was in February of this year. Let them continue on a path, please, of securing their future. And we cannot be on this podium speaking about Haiti without thanking Kenya and President Ruto for their remarkable leadership. After many delays and in what represents now a historical precedent for an African country, they have ensured that an African country has taken the lead in helping to tackle the peace and security challenge beyond its own continent. That is the kind of reset that we need in the international community. And Mr. President, you cannot come on this platform regrettably, although I look forward to the day when I will not have to say it, when we must ask for reprieve for the people of Cuba. It is unacceptable, it is unconscionable, and that it continues today is a mark on our international conscience. The Cuban people continue to face the most dire of economic circumstances, and that this is directly as a result of its exclusion and its designation as a state sponsor of terrorism. And I have addressed our only knowledge of terrorism, and Cuba is in fact the downing of the Cubana plane off the waters of Barbados, where Cubans, Guyanese, and Koreans were killed. My friends, Cuba has been a valuable partner stepping up for us when it has mattered most, by the provision of nurses and doctors in pandemics, and by the provision of other essential workers when the global community needed it and when people needed to be liberated in Southern Africa. The reality is that we must have and continue to have resolve in calling for the embargo to be lifted, and we will condemn it year after year after year because it is simply wrong. As we say so, we pray that the people of Cuba, as they determine what damages they have found from Hurricane Helen, as well as we pray for the people of Florida, who clearly are going to spend the next few days identifying the damage as a result of a hurricane that hit Category 4 when it reached Florida. This is the climate crisis that we speak about. The people of Nigeria are still counting the bodies with respect to the floods that took place there. We have hard work to do. In our own Caribbean region, Beryl literally decimated the islands of Carriacou and Union Island, and indeed would have affected Grenada and St. Vincent more broadly. Jamaica and my own country's coastal infrastructure was significantly affected, with our fishing industry, 90% of it being decimated. This season of superlatives, with its floods and droughts, its hurricanes and fires, will take the lives and livelihoods of too many. The climate crisis is hitting us almost weekly across the globe. The deniers of the climate crisis, they too need a reset that will admit of the absolute necessity of collective action by the global community to save our way of life and our planet. Mr. President, at the start of this week, the skies were much darker. I truly believe so. We are starting to see some glimmers of light. We leave New York this week noting that the clouds are lifting, conscious that the sun is peeping out in certain areas, not all, but in certain critical areas, giving us a sense of renewed hope that reset is in fact not only possible, but necessary in key areas: institutional reform, reform in our financial architecture, reform in how we view development, but above all else, reform in how we see each other and value each other. This hope springs from the Pact for the Future and the many declarations that we have made here, the terms in which my fellow leaders spoke from this platform for the most part, the urgent need to recognize reset, 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 even if they didn't call it by that name. It is as if we all truly understand and accept the challenge of rising to solve the major difficulties that are faced by the people of the world, and to recognize that global moral strategic leadership requires of us the commitment to redress the wrongs and to take care of saving people and planet. But recognition of the need for the reset, while it is the first step in any issue, what is now also needed is eternal vigilance as our companion, so that as we take the steps to transform attitudes and institutions and rules, we will not succeed overnight. We will not succeed even in the next decade. But if we don't do the reset to change the legacy of centuries of exploitation and domination, we will not be fit for purpose to meet the needs of our people in the third decade of the 21st century. I can think, therefore, of no better way to conclude than with a song that I had cause to use almost 30 years ago from my own country. Song from Edwin Yearwood, when I first stood on this podium almost 30 years ago in 1995 as a young minister of youth. And I quote, "A voice in my head keeps talking to me. It tells me the road is long. It tells me we must be strong. Roll with the pain and roll with the strife, for today is the rest of the start of your life." Mr. President, may the new hope fostered here this week signal the start of a new deal for people who hitherto were not seen, and even with the existence of this body, whose voice and presence were not felt. These people have been recognized too often, and these countries, as mere statistics, and not with the human dignity that is their birthright, or the human dignity that is the conferred right from these United Nations. Mr. President, I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister, Minister for National Security and the Public Service, and Minister for Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment of Barbados. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Tshering Tobgay, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Bhutan. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I bring to you warm greetings from His Majesty the Druk Gyalpo. Excellencies, 53 years ago, on the 21st of September, 1971, a small Himalayan kingdom was admitted to the United Nations. On that day, after centuries of self-imposed isolation, Bhutan became the 128th member of the United Nations. It was a defining moment for us. When a small, poor, landlocked country nestled in the world's highest mountain joined the global community of nations. That same year, the United Nations created the least developed country category to provide targeted support to the world's poorest nations. Bhutan was among the first to be admitted in that list. Back then, our economy was primarily agrarian, operating largely on a barter system. Our per capita GDP income stood at just $215. Life expectancy was barely 40 years. Infant mortality was tragically high at 142 deaths for every 1,000 live births. And our literacy rate was woefully low. We had only, in fact, less than 300 students in the few scattered schools that had been established to provide modern education. Today, I stand before you with a story of transformation and progress. Our per capita GDP has risen to more than $3,500. Life expectancy has increased to 70 years. Infant mortality has plummeted to 15 deaths per 1,000 live births. And our literacy rate, it has climbed to 71%, with youth literacy skyrocketing to 99%. I am pleased to report to this august assembly that because of our all-round progress, last December, 52 years after joining the United Nations, Bhutan graduated from the LDC category. To achieve this achievement did not come easily. It was a journey marked by hard work, perseverance, and sacrifice. But we were not alone. We had the support of many friends who accompanied us on this important journey. I take this opportunity to extend our deep gratitude to the United Nations and its specialized agencies. I would also like to thank all our development partners, including Japan, the European Union, the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank for their unwavering support. But most importantly, I would like to reserve our deepest thanks to India, our closest friend and neighbor. They have been with us from the very beginning of our development journey and have remained steadfast in their support and friendship. Excellencies, graduating from the LDC category is a significant milestone. But what truly matters is that we did it in our own terms. Under the leadership of our enlightened monarchs, Bhutan has pursued a development path grounded in the philosophy of gross national happiness. This approach places the happiness and well-being of our people at the center of our development agenda. Thanks to gross national happiness, our economy, while it is still small, is sustainable and inclusive. Healthcare and education are free for all. Our unique culture not only survives, but thrives. More than 72% of our land is under forest cover, and we are recognized as a biodiversity hotspot and a carbon-negative country. Our democracy, a gift from our king, has been embraced by a reluctant population. Excellencies, having graduated from the LDC category, it is now our responsibility to ensure that we sustain our hard-earned progress and that under no circumstances should we ever backslide. As we chart a new course for the future, we are faced with new challenges, particularly those arising from our weak economy. Foremost among them is youth unemployment. To address these challenges, we must strengthen our economy. We must provide our youth with meaningful opportunities to grow and to prosper. We must embrace a new development paradigm. In this context, I am pleased to report that His Majesty the King has announced the establishment of the Gaelifu Mindfulness City. The Gaelifu Mindfulness City is a transformative vision for future urban spaces, a blueprint for living mindfully and sustainably. Spanning 2,600 square kilometers of pristine forests and fertile farmlands, it will enable human innovation and natural ecosystems to thrive together while fostering human well-being, environmental sustainability, and mindful living. We invite thought leaders, innovators, and investors to join us in building this groundbreaking city, contributing to a model of peace, harmony, and progress that others can follow. Excellencies, Bhutan's story is one of hope, but it is also a call to action. More than 50 years have passed, and only 7 nations have graduated from the LDC category, leaving 46 countries still in need. This is unacceptable. The international community must intensify its efforts to ensure that no nation is left behind, that all LDC countries achieve graduation. To accomplish this, we must address poverty, inequality, and vulnerability with a renewed sense of urgency. The Pact for the Future, which we adopted collectively at the Summit of the Future, provides us with a roadmap to transform the lives of the world's most vulnerable. However, transforming the future requires that we also transform institutions shaping it. The United Nations must evolve to meet the realities of today's world. The Security Council as it stands is a relic of the past. We need a council that reflects the current geopolitical, economic landscape, and social realities. Bhutan has long advocated for the reform of the Security Council to make it more representative and effective. For this, India, with its significant economic growth and population and leadership of the Global South, deserves a permanent seat at the Security Council. Similarly, Japan, a leading donor and peace builder, warrants permanent membership. Excellencies, in conclusion, let me reiterate our deep gratitude for the support we have received on Bhutan's journey to LDC graduation. Now we are committed to sustaining this progress, but we will need your continued support. In this regard, we invite your support and investment in initiatives like the Gaelifu Mindfulness City. However, as we celebrate Bhutan's progress, we must also intensify our efforts to support other LDCs, ensuring that they too can achieve graduation. In this regard, the role of the United Nations is more critical than ever, reinforcing the imperative for multilateralism in addressing the global challenges we face. As we look to the future, I have the honor to close by repeating a profound message from His Majesty, our beloved King. I first did so 7 years ago, and I repeat, no nation today can stand alone in achievement. Time is slowly telling us that there can be no lasting individual success without success as a community. And there cannot be lasting national progress and success if it does not fit into a future of global peace, harmony, and equality. The world must progress together or fail together. Thank you, and Tashidile.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Bhutan. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Xavier Espot Zamora, Head of the Government of the Principality of Andorra. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to begin by extending my congratulations to His Excellency Mr. Philemon Yang on his election as President of the 79th General Assembly. I would like to thank you, President, for having chosen unity in diversity, sustainable development and human dignity everywhere for everyone as the theme. Andorra could not be any more in agreement than we are with this goal, which we fully support, because my country is tangible, real proof that people are able to live together peacefully for more than 800 years. Indeed, thanks to our understanding and mutual respect shown by our inhabitants, our country has never had a war and we've never had an army. Andorra has always been an oasis of peace, tolerance and cohabitation, including during the most troubled times of the old continent. I'd also particularly like to thank the Secretary-General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his perseverance, for always preferring the path of conciliation, and for his message in favor of international law and against climate change. I would also like to stress the impetus that the Secretary-General has given to the Summit of the Future, which gave rise to the Pact for the Future that my country has signed. The goal of this is to strengthen the multilateral system, to adopt concrete measures to address new challenges and establish a roadmap to address existential risks to humanity, civilization, and most people on Earth. Classical authors, they are the basis of Western culture. They tell us, and I use the present tense because they never die, they say that all speech is vain and empty unless it be accompanied by action. What is important are the things that we do throughout our lives. All civilizations are born in specific circumstances, and very often they go down in history thanks to their conquests. But what is the conquest of this civilization? What is its vocation? And what is the heritage that it will leave behind? Or rather, what is the conquest, vocation and heritage that we want this civilization to leave to future generations? Ladies and gentlemen, today in the West we very often forget that democracy goes over and above simply putting your ballot in the box every 4 or 5 years. The very substance of the concept of democracy is the values involved: dignity, tolerance, equality, freedom, respect for people and nations. These values are human rights, the rights that this General Assembly has decided to protect 76 years ago by adopting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It would seem that the spirit in which this declaration was forged, a symbol of peace and dignity following two devastating world wars, is fading little by little. The forward march of extremist political positions is a reaction in the light of something that is viewed as a threat, an order that's viewed as a threat. The feeling that a recent past has been lost and it's better than the present, that has invaded current generations, and heightened by the idea that climate change will worsen living conditions and that globalization and migration flows will dilute and depersonalize our societies, and that children and young people today will live less well than their parents did. We find ourselves at a key moment in history where the debate cannot be hidden behind rhetorical language to avoid this situation. We will soon be celebrating the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, and this organization must continue to be the cornerstone of our world, to be an organization where states and the nations that make it up are moving in the same direction with the same goal, to respond effectively to the great challenges of our times in order to leave future generations a heritage which promises hope. Ladies and gentlemen, we have never had so many tools to bring about cooperation and dialogue. In the light of a very complex reality, but convinced as we are of the equality between nations, we must ensure the implementation of the Charter of the United Nations, strengthened by the pillars of the defense of human rights as well as the defense of international humanitarian law. Those are the things, and those alone, that must govern relations between states. The serious situations in Ukraine, Gaza, Lebanon and Sudan, and other regions where we see conflicts that have become permanent, particularly in the region of the Sahel, we cannot remain indifferent to these. We must urgently become mobilized to achieve the most noble goal of politics, peace. We must come together and find solutions to conflicts without violence or recourse to military resources. We would call upon all parties to work for peace, and that they respect international humanitarian law and that they obey it. Because nothing can justify the attacks suffered by civilian populations, nothing can justify the attacks against hospitals and schools, and nothing can justify using hunger as a strategy of war. Nothing can justify such irrational behavior. Children are the main victims of this. Children and young people take pride of place in on the international agenda of Andorra, because we firmly believe that they are the present and the future of humanity, which means that all actions to benefit them become strategic actions for the development of a country, of any country. This is why, since its creation, we have supported the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary-General for Children and Armed Conflict, and more recently the study on the impact of climate change on children and armed conflict. When I asked you at the beginning of my statement what conquest, what vocation and what heritage did we want to leave behind, there can be no doubt a world in peace for our children and our young people, a world that provides opportunities to each and every one of them. This is the great responsibility which we bear, to ensure that future generations do not have a life worse than ours, but rather that they are fully able to participate in progress, as we have agreed in recent days in the Summit of the Future. Excellencies, Andorra joined the United Nations in 1993. The international context at the time was full of hope, the reunification of Europe after the Cold War. We decided to become a member of the United Nations with the conviction that we wanted to be a society open to the world, which shares with the international community its opportunities and its challenges. We believe that the problems of the world are also our problems, and it is for that reason that we wanted and want to participate in solving them. 3 decades have gone by since then, and although we see the Cold War re-emerging, and whilst in the Middle East we see increasing tensions, and whilst extremism is advancing and is of concern, Andorra fully believes in its international commitments and multilateralism. We believe that these are the best and the only instruments to resolve the current crisis. But Andorra also attaches particular importance to regional cooperation, particularly that deployed by the European Union, with which Andorra is negotiating an association agreement, which will mean that we will be able progressively and in a structured way to enter the European single market, to diversify our economy and participate in building a geographic, economic and political reality, that of the European Union, with a privileged status of associated state. Whether it be obligations that we undertake when joining an international organization or by signing an international treaty, Andorra acts to fully respect its commitments. And as small as my country might appear to major states, that in no way takes away from our ambitious objectives. And this is always essential, as is our multilateralism, the climate emergency, gender equality, the digital transition, and cultural diversity. On that last point, Andorra is very proud to have co-facilitated for one further year the resolution on multilingualism at the United Nations together with Guatemala. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change is undoubtedly a global threat, but it's also true that it affects certain countries more than others. This is the case for coastal regions where the sea level is increasing and mountainous regions where the ecosystem has become more vulnerable. This is the case for Andorra. The effects of climate change risk changing the way of life of its inhabitants and even the economy of the country. And it's for this reason that we have made the fight against climate change one of our main goals, internationally as well as nationally. Since the ratification of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 2011, Andorra has met its communication obligations by respecting the principles of transparency, coherence, comparability, exhaustivity, and accuracy, and we have even implemented certain things ahead of time with regard to the convention. In 2015, Andorra was one of the first to join the Framework Convention and produce our NDC, Nationally Determined Contribution. And we updated it in 2020 and 2022, and we plan to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. In 2023, Andorra was the first state to present its biannual report on transparency, which showed once again the importance that we attach to our commitment to fight against climate change. Nationally, we have also undertaken great efforts to implement a new energy policy to progressively increase the national production of renewable energy and replace heat production systems with less polluting systems. This policy in favor of renewable energy was led by the public sector with the implementation of very ambitious legislation and using significant aid and action plans. However, do you know that all of these efforts will be in vain if other countries do not do the same thing, if we are not all moving in the same direction, because fighting climate change is the most urgent global challenge that we have. The broadest challenge which requires the highest possible level of cooperation, collaboration, generosity and respect. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the midway point in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda, and we are going to soon be in the final home stretch. What has been achieved is already deceiving, bearing in mind that behind the results are millions of people who are suffering the consequences. The Sustainable Development Goals are certainly very ambitious, but if we decide to implement them with persistence, creativity and innovation, then we can bring about real change by taking as a principle inclusion and making gender equality a reality, sustainability a norm, the protection of children an inviolable principle, and by ensuring that divides are overcome once and for all. The poet and novelist of France, Louis Aragon, wrote that the future of men is women. That was in 1963, on the eve of full equality between men and women. A genuine declaration of love and admiration for his wife, his muse. In certain parts of the world, we still have a lot to do in order to understand that it's in our interest that women have the same chances to learn and develop their talents and to work and to earn their living as do men. In Andorra, equality, non-discrimination and inclusion are cross-cutting elements of public policy. We have adopted legislative measures in this regard in order to respect our commitments and to fully achieve these goals. That is a logical consequence in a society where women play a very active part in public affairs. But over and above public policy, the key element of social transformation is education. Equal education does not just mean teaching girls and boys to mutually respect each other. It means giving them the tools necessary to question social norms which perpetuate inequalities and to enable them to build a society where every individual is able to develop themselves to their full potential, whatever their gender. Currently, parity is respected in our institutions in decision-making positions, and for the first time we've had the honor to have an Andorran expert on the United Nations Committee for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. But bringing about gender equality requires determination and perseverance on the part of each and every one of us. As representatives of our respective countries, we have the moral and political obligation to promote this transformation. We must become committed to ensure that gender equality is not just a long-term aspiration, but a concrete reality in our societies. That is the only solution that will guarantee a better future for future generations. Excellencies, access to information is in the process of redefining the paradigms of growth and economic and social development. As public services and the private sector are being converted to the digital world, the divide that separates those that have access to this world and those don't is becoming ever more pernicious. The Global Digital Compact that we adopted during the Summit for the Future includes actions in favor of digital literary actions in order to guarantee an inclusive, open, safe and protected digital future. In this area, multilateralism has a crucial role to play to create opportunities, and at the same time it must guarantee accessibility and security in this new virtual space of globalization. For small states such as Andorra, these technologies have the potential to provide resources with exponential added value. Aware as we are of the situation and our manifest need to diversify our economy, Andorra has made huge strides in this area. Currently, 6% of Andorran homes have an internet connection. The country has implemented a national strategy for digital transition, which is particularly focused on digital rights of citizens and respect for Sustainable Development Goals 9, 16 and 17, with the creation of an ethical and legal framework that preserves digital rights, protecting private life and data security, and ensuring free access to digital information, because we want all citizens to be able to access the digital world and thus avoid situations of inequality. Ladies and gentlemen, the Principality of Andorra has made a commitment to this organization of peoples and for peoples 30 years ago, in the hope that a better world would be possible, because our country, a small size, can also make exemplary choices. We presented ourselves to the world as an ancestral land which finally has found its place in the community of nations, a country that is open to the world, with a constructive spirit and a peaceful disposition open to dialogue, in favor of comprehension and harmony between peoples. These are the values that continue to guide us nationally and internationally. It is important that all peoples promote a new culture of peace based on an end to war and on a commitment to bring about peace agreements to resolve conflicts. Development must reach all four corners of the planet, where fundamental rights must be respected, and it is essential that this new digital universe be based on knowledge. I began my intervention by quoting the classical authors. If I may, I'd like to end in the same way. There's a work that is at the heart of Greek literature that has left its mark on Western culture and which is very difficult to forget. It refers to conquest and destruction, hatred, compassion, love, and death. Homer's Iliad is in a certain way a mirror of the human condition. Even though this work shows that life is not always fair and that it is subject to the will of the gods, it also shows us that human relations can, if we want them to be, profoundly humane. And I think that we must take ownership of this message. It is important to believe in humanity and to work to build, all of us together, peace in the world, as well as a world of solidarity that is more just and more inclusive. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the head of government of the Principality of Andorra. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Mohammed Yunus, Chief Advisor